I believe you are quite aware the situation has changed since last we spoke.
The truth is still the truth, and a bargain is still a bargain.
And Mayor Cermak is now deceased.
Yes. What does that have to do with our contract?
I do not recall signing a contract with you, Mr. Eller.
We had a verbal agreement. I'm sure my uncle here will attest to that.
Nathan, please. You're being most rude.
But Dawes reacted just as I knew he would.
Lewis, as a family man, I quite understand your position. As for you, young Mr. Heller, you should not have spoken to the papers of this. It was a breach of confidence.
Nothing was said of our arrangement being a confidential one. Besides which, I was in fact discreet.
How so?
I didn't tell the reporters why I was offered the job at the fair. Void our deal, sir, and I'm going to be put into an embarrassing light. I will have to inform the press of your involvement.
This reeks of blackmail, young man.
It reeks of business. Our arrangement is binding in my view, and if you feel differently, I'll be noisy about it.
Nathan.
I'm not a big wheel like you, General, but us little wheels can get good and goddamn squeaky when we don't get our grease.
My secretary will have contracts ready for you to sign this afternoon at 4. Please return and sign them. Good afternoon, gentlemen.
Robservations with Robert Meyer Burnett.
Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your Duke of Dope Discourse, your master of fun and wonder, your viceroy of verisimilitude, your sommelier of sci-fi and cinema, your collector friend, your evangelist of the imagination, and the perhaps never-to-be-defined existential Mr. Rogers. That's right. Moi. I'm, of course, Rob casting at you members of this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. I'm coming at you from the Robservatory with Robservations episode 1030.
Joining us now live from our New York studios is John Simon, film critic for the National Review and drama critic for New York Magazine. From our Chicago bureau, Gene Siskel, film critic for the Chicago Tribune and co-host of the syndicated television series At the Movies. And Roger Ebert, co-host of At the Movies and film critic for the Chicago Sun-Times. Mr. Simon, you described The Empire Strikes Back, the second in this trilogy, as malodorous offal, and I understand you're also well able to keep your enthusiasm in check for the third in the trilogy. Why so unkind?
Well, I think the raves for the early Star Wars have been so violent and so extravagant that I feel one cannot afford to mince one's words if one dislikes these things.
You certainly did not do that, but why do you feel they are so bad?
I feel they're so bad because they're completely dehumanizing. Obviously, let's face it, they are for children or for childish adults. They're not for adult mentalities, which unfortunately means that they're not for a lot of my fellow critics who also lack adult mentalities. But anyway, they are for children, and they're brutalizing children, they're stultifying children, they're making children dumber than they need to be. A great work for children, like Huck Finn, for example, tells a child something about reality, about people, about life, about growing up. These films try to keep children stupid children forever, and that, I think, is wrong.
Gene Siskel, Roger Ebert, if you would like to remove the dagger from between your ribs and strike back, have at it.
I totally disagree with Mr. Simon. I don't know what he did as a child, but I spent a lot of my Saturday matinees watching science fiction movies and serials and having a great time of being stimulated and having my imagination stimulated and having all sorts of visions take place in my mind that helped me to become an adult and to still say young at heart. And I would say not that I'm childlike, but that he is old at heart.
Yeah, when I think that Mr. Simon ought to do what I did over the weekend. I went to a regular movie theater in a shopping center in Michigan City, Indiana, and I sat amid all the kids. There was one tall head and a lot of small heads.
Were they dumber than they needed to be?
No, they weren't dumber, to quote that interesting phrase. They were ecstatic. They were enjoying it, and they were rooting. They were asking each other who's who. They were getting all involved. They were rooting for the right guys and booing the bad guys. I thought it was a lot of fun. I feel badly, honestly, I feel badly that this other critic, John Simon, didn't have a good time at these pictures. That's too bad for him.
All right, while it would probably be more fun to have you sling mud at one another, all three of you, let's talk about the movie nevertheless. Is it a great film? I mean, it's clearly great technology, and it does wonderful things with special effects. But in terms of the normal standards by which we judge movies, is this a great film? John Simon, clearly you say no, but why?
Well, first of all, you know, special effects are like the tail of the dog, which should not wag the whole animal. When you have a film that's 90% special, and that's a kindly estimate, 90% special effects, you might just as well be watching a animated cartoon, because finally all those special effects begin to look totally unreal. You're looking for something that looks like flesh and blood there. You have three lousy actors in the main roles who don't contribute much flesh and blood. You have ghastly dialogue, terrible plotting, miserable characterization, which also do not contribute flesh and blood. So what you're left with is something that Walt Disney could have done just as well with a drawing board and pencils and colors.
All right, Roger Ebert, beyond the undeniable fact that it's clearly perceived as entertainment by a great many people, how would you argue that it's a great movie?
These are the sorts of movies that Disney people should be making, and the kinds of movies that Disney made 20, 30 years ago. I think all movies are special effects. Movies are not real, they're two-dimensional. A film goes through the camera, the projector throws the light on the screen, and that makes a special effect. It's a dream, it's an imagination. As to whether this film is good or not, it excited me, it made me laugh, it made me thrilled, and that's what a movie like this is for. I also enjoy films by Ingmar Bergman and people like that. I share that taste with Mr. Simon. But I try, I think, in my own movie-going taste to be broad enough to also understand why a bunch of people might want to get together and see a Star Wars movie and enjoy it.
Gene Siskel, is it not possible to separate these two and to say, yes, there's such a thing as great entertainment, but it's not a great movie? Let's not pretend it is.
Well, you can say what its aspirations are. I don't think that a film should be rewarded for aiming low and hitting that mark, which sometimes in film criticism you do get that. The sort of junk movie is campy fun. I don't think this is campy fun. I think this is well-made fun. This is very good of its kind, and I want to cite another film that's out now that shows you what this kind of film can be like if it's junk, and that's Space Hunter, Adventures in the Forbidden Zone, shot in 3D. That movie is 3D and is supposed to be kind of special. The Jedi film is in 2D, and it's a lot more exciting. Just seeing those pictures back to back as I did over the last week, one clearly is better of its kind. I think Jedi is very good of its kind. What do kids have these days for entertainment? They have the Black Stallion picture, which I know we both liked. I don't know if Mr. Simon did. And you have the Star Wars films, and that's about it, not much more. This is very good of its kind.
Mr. Simon, have you ever sunk as low as Space Hunter?
No, I'm happy to say I haven't. I think there are wonderful things that you could take kids to. There's a little film called Tender Mercies, which is not a children's movie, but in which a child is one of the main characters. And that is the sort of thing that I would take my children if I had them, where they can see something about human beings, about life. In this thing, you see one set of robots, some of them ostensibly flesh and blood, but actually just as mechanical as the real robots, attacking another set of robots. It zaps you, it races past you, projectiles are hurtling this way and that. There's nothing to get involved with. Sure, there is a very primitive sense in which the Empire is bad and a very primitive sense in which the others are good. But it is all such a chaos, such a jumble, such a confusion, such a mechanical, technological, whirly-gig that you don't have any chance to associate yourself with anyone, to identify yourself with anyone. There are no people there with whom you can sympathize.
That just isn't my experience in seeing it, again, with a whole bunch of kids. They were able to sort out who was who very easily. They had no trouble with this picture, understanding what was going on. I got to ask Mr. Simon a question. Here's sort of a test question. Wasn't your heart warmed even a little bit by Yoda?
I'll tell you what, we're in a bit of a tough technical situation here because Mr. Simon has just lost his earpiece. But if you can hear us again now,
I can
Mr.
hear
Simon,
you. Yes, I heard the question.
You were asked whether your heart wasn't warmed a little by Yoda.
Well, yes, I mean a little, but let's say if I saw him in a window of F.A.O. Schwartz and I looked at him for 3 seconds and said that's a kind of cute little figurine, I would have had enough of Yoda.
Listen, 3 seconds of acceptance on your part, Mr. Simon, is all that we can hope for and all that we have time for. I'm afraid at this point I thank you and Gene Siskel and also Roger Ebert for joining us.
A debate from 42 years ago. I would imagine all three of those men are no longer with us, of course. Roger Ebert and Gene Siskel, the great film critics. It's very interesting to me. I talk a lot about, I'm going to be honest, I'm a bit of a snob. I'll say it. I'll admit it right now. I am a bit of a snob. And to me, a lot of people, I get different points of view from. Look, I love all you guys. I love Fandom. I've been a part of Fandom since I went to my first convention when I was like 8 in Seattle, where I grew up. The One Reel Vaudeville show put on the Sci-Fi Expo when I was in elementary school and junior high. It started, I met Harlan Ellison there in the Space Needle elevator. So I'm a bit of a snob. Now, I want to explain for myself, my fandom began, as I've talked a lot about on this show, that I can pinpoint it back to really when I was 5 years old. Because when I was 5 years old, that's when I was aware of when things were on TV. That's when I want to say I really discovered Star Trek. I knew when it was on. I accidentally discovered The Twilight Zone and found out when that was on. My mom, was bringing home, back then, there was a book called The TV Guide, and every week when my mother went grocery shopping, she would bring home the TV Guide, and I would look in the TV Guide for anything that looked sci-fi fantasy related. I still watched a lot of Saturday morning cartoons and all that, but what I really loved was anything to do with science fiction, fantasy, or horror. And from the time I saw Star Wars when I was 10, it came out when I was 10 years old. Saw it opening weekend in May. I didn't see it on the 25th. I saw it the Sunday it had opened. So I think it opened on a Wednesday. And I saw it. My dad tried to take my friend and I to see it, Gardner Morelli and I to see it. I think on Friday after school, there was a huge line around the block. I couldn't believe it. I'd never seen the line before. And we actually I think, to be honest, it was on a Saturday because we saw a double bill of The Car and Race with the Devil at 10. That was a big score. But I wanted to begin this conversation by showing you the science fiction films that I had seen before I saw Star Wars. And I want to ask you, what do they all have in common? And these are science fiction films that span from really 1950 to 1976. And at this point, Fandom, especially science fiction fandom, which was way more snobby than I was, or am, they did not look kindly to science fiction media, meaning movies and television shows, because there were very few that anybody held in any high regard. But let me just run a few titles by you. And these were movies I remember seeing between being 5 and 10, before I saw Star Wars, pre-Star Wars, BBY. And here we go. See if you can tell me what any of these movies what all of these movies have in common. Destination Moon. When Worlds Collide. War of the Worlds. The Incredible Shrinking Man. Invasion of the Body Snatchers. The Thing, Howard Hawks' The Thing. 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. On the Beach. Forbidden Planet. The Time Machine. The 10th Victim, which is a precursor to both The Running Man and The Long Walk. Marooned. Seconds. Planet of the Apes, Colossus, the Forbin Project, The Andromeda Strain, Slaughterhouse-5, No Blade of Grass. I love that poster. What a poster. Soylent Green, The Omega Man, The Final Program, a.k.a. The Last Days of Man on Earth, Solaris, A Boy and His Dog, The Terminal Man, Rollerball, and Logan's Run, which I saw opening night in 1976. These were generally considered to be the best of the science fiction. There was more. There was more, but I picked these for a specific reason. Now, you might say, if I'm going to add to that list, why didn't I pick one more? And I'm going to talk about it. For those of you who probably already got it in the chat, they're all based on books. They're all based on books or, in certain cases, short stories. All of them. Now, you might say, well, Rob, where's 2001? 2001 was actually based on a short story, and I should have included it, but I could, but I wanted to say this afterwards. 2001, the book actually was written concurrently by Arthur C. Clarke with the movie, even though it was loosely based on a short story he wrote called The Sentinel. All of these were based on books. Now, when I was a kid, one of the things I started to recognize were some of the people like Richard Matheson, who wrote The Shrinking Man and wrote I Am Legend, which became The Last Man on Earth, which became The Omega Man, which became Will Smith's I Am Legend. I started noticing that the guys that wrote these movies also wrote books and also wrote episodes of Star Trek or Twilight Zone or other TV shows. So it got me interested in reading. I became a book hound. And in the wake of Star Wars, I made my parents let me join the Sci-Fi Book Club. Now, I didn't have any money, so they would pay for it, but my parents were happy to dole out like $5 a month, so I would get 2 books from the Sci-Fi Book Club. Now, after I saw Star Wars and joined the Sci-Fi Book Club, these are some books that, and you'll notice that the books I'm about to bring up did not have film adaptations at the time, but they were books that I read in the 3 years. So from the time I started in 4th grade up through when I was 13. So these are the books that I remember. I got a lot more, but these are the highlights of the books I got from the Science Fiction Book Club in the wake of Star Wars. Dune by Frank Herbert. Walter M. Miller's Canticle for Leibowitz. Ursula K. Le Guin's The Left Hand of Darkness. Arthur C. Clarke's Childhood's End. Fahrenheit 451 by Ray Bradbury. And then, of course, The Martian Chronicles. I read The Martian Chronicles first, to be honest. The Foundation at the Time trilogy. Larry Niven's Ringworld. Philip K. Dick's The Man in the High Castle. Robert Heinlein's Stranger in a Strange Land. And I read this book, I got this book, More Than Human, Theodore Sturgeon, because he worked on Star Trek. And I thought his last name was interesting. Earth Abides. Hal Clement's Mission of Gravity. The Caves of Steel by Isaac Asimov, an Elijah Bailey novel. The first book of C.S. Lewis, yes, that's C.S. Lewis's science fiction trilogy, his space trilogy, Out of the Silent Planet. I guess in this case it's his cosmic trilogy. And Lest Darkness Fall by L. Sprague de Camp. Now those were all books, and they just represent a small cross-section of what I was reading. Now, for me, science fiction, you couldn't watch movies or The Twilight Zone or The Outer Limits or Star Trek or even Irwin Allen's shows, Voyage to the Bottom of the Sea, Land of the Giants, Time Tunnel. You had to read. Like, in my mind, once I was watching these science fiction films and I found out that like Michael Crichton, who wrote the novel The Andromeda Strain, went on to write and direct Westworld, but it wasn't based on a novel. And then he ended up, The Terminal Man was based on his book. And like, that's how I discovered Michael Crichton, because The Andromeda Strain scared the fuck out of me when I saw it because of the opening, which they kind of ripped off for the first regular episode of The $6 Million Man. So in my mind, in order to be a proper fan, you had to read in order to gain insight into all the guys that were creating this stuff. And for me, in my mind, I'm like, oh my God, you mean a guy that like wrote a Star Trek episode has novels, and then you'd find books of short stories by them, and then I'd find out that like, wait a minute, one of the guys who wrote Logan's Run wrote the Twilight Zone episode Kick the Can? And co-wrote the original Ocean's 11? Could that be true? And if it was, once again, as I began to go to conventions, I began to understand that the people at conventions were way more interested in talking about books than they were about talking about movies. Now, at the same time, I was also listening to records, like Power Records, when they would give you a comic book and you'd get a 45, and there was Planet of the Apes and Star Trek and Marvel. And I also had a storybook record of Peter and the Wolf, dun 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 dun, you know, that classical music, but there was somebody telling me the story. And around this time, I also discovered the CBS Radio Mystery Theater that was on Cairo at 10:07 at night. And this is all, again, in Seattle. And Seattle also, per capita, had, I believe at the time, more movie theaters than anywhere else in the country per capita. And so I was going to movies, too. And, you know, my parents would mostly take me to Disney films when I was younger, but I would see things like The Land That Time Forgot. You know, Doug McClure was like a hero. But I did see a lot of the Disney live-action movies, like Candle Shoe. I saw the Herbie movies. But, you know, when I was 9 years old in 1976, my mom, I begged her for weeks to take me to see Logan's Run. I didn't read the book until a year later, but she did take me to see it. Of course, the second bill, it was 2 movies at the John Dance Theater, and the second movie was Fantastic Planet. My mom jerked me and my sister out of our seats 10 minutes into that animated film, which is, I think, and I've said this before, it's probably my favorite animated movie of all time. But, because she said, I will not sit here and watch a movie where people are treated like ants. But the thing was, it all worked together in this heady, frothy mix of stories. And I didn't care where the stories came from. I didn't care if they came over the radio. I didn't care if they were in a comic book. I didn't care if I was listening to them on a 45 or a 33 long play record of Peter and the Wolf. I would watch any science fiction, fantasy, or horror movie that I could get my hands on, or at the time, it was whatever was on TV or at the movie theaters. I mean, I would even go see our local school system would show movies, prints. They would have like a 16 millimeter projector, and if there was any whiff, I remember seeing Pinocchio in outer space, which I thought at the time was a banger, you know. So these movies shaped my childhood, and if you look at the list of films that I showed, none of them were for children. They weren't really, I mean, you could say that The Incredible Shrinking Man might have been kind of for kids, but all of these movies were heady. Next time, I'd ask all of you to watch 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. If you've never seen it, it's a Disney live-action movie that was made in the mid-50s. It's still, to this day, one of the greatest fantasy films ever made. And it was made by Walt Disney. And I believe some people might say Mary Poppins is his crowning achievement, but I would say that 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, really, in terms of live-action films, Disney was killing it back with Swiss Family Robinson, 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, Mary Poppins. I mean, these are incredible, incredible films. And that's where Disney was live action. And why 20,000 Leagues is not on 4K? Why Mary Poppins is not on 4K? What a crime, Disney. What's up with you guys? But anyway, the concepts and the things that these movies were about were thought-provoking. They were blowing my mind. I mean, I remember watching the Andromeda strain, first of all, it scared me to death. And two, when I'm watching these scientists in rooms talking to each other, and there was all kinds of goings on that was, to be honest, above my pay grade, but I was fascinated. I was trying to understand. I remember seeing Colossus, the Forbin Project. This is the voice of Colossus, and again, based on a trilogy of books. A 1970 beautiful widescreen film, although I didn't know it was widescreen when I first saw it on TV. But these were the movies that fired my imagination. These were the things, I mean, Rollerball, we loved it as kids because when it aired on TV, we all watched it, and then we all went and actually played Rollerball in our cul-de-sac. We were on motocross bikes, not dirt bikes. And then we were on roller skates or skateboards hanging on, and we were trying to pummel each other. And there was, I want to say the Westovers had a mailbox and we would use the mailbox as the goal. Because why not? But if you watch that movie, that's not really a kid's movie. I mean, you knew we watched the big rollerball games, and then we probably tuned out and came back and whatever. But these were the things that excited me. This is what got me into science fiction. And then when you would read, that's when it got really mind-blowing. And the science fiction that was coming out in the 70s, the horror novels that were coming out in the 70s and early 80s, I mean, I joke, I call them my YA fiction. They were not for kids today. The unbelievably explicit, nasty sex, the awesome violence. I mean, I was reading things that were, I can't even imagine. If I had kids, I would never if I had like an 11-year-old son right now, I would never let him have any of the books that I read when I was 11. Because kids today seem to be, in certain respects, they're way beyond my years in terms of using technology. But in terms of grappling with intellectual concepts, it's a little disappointing seeing where things are today. And I'm not pillorying anybody. I'm just saying that the programming and the concepts, look, you go back and you watch The Twilight Zone. You go back and you watch Star Trek. Hell, I'd love if the writers of current Star Trek would go back and watch old classic Star Trek without thinking it's some campy thing that they can make better. But go back and watch these shows and see just how sophisticated they were. And this is what I was brought up on. Then, in 1977, mind blown seeing Star Wars. Because with all the movies that I had seen, nothing could have prepared me for what it was like to see the fully realized universe of Star Wars. The visual effects, I mean, 2001 had great visual effects, but they weren't trying to do what Star Wars was trying to do on every level. Floating cars, floating droids, a gigantic Death Star, blockade runners, Star Destroyers, I mean, cantinas. There was nothing like it. I mean, it was so far beyond anything that I'd seen. And as you know, that list I showed you, there was countless more that weren't on it. I just picked the big movies that were for books first. But to see what Star Wars was supposed to be. Now, George Lucas, a lot of people are always saying to me that, George Lucas was making the movie for kids. I think he might have thought that because he was adapting Flash Gordon. And people keep coming at me like, Rob, George Lucas fired his first editor and brought these other editors on. It was saved in the edit. No, it was just edited. I can tell you how many movies do they fire an editor and bring somebody else on? I've been the guy they brought in to save movies as a film editor. Not at the level of Star Wars, but certainly at a very small, minuscule level. The movie Arcade, for instance, the first movie I ever worked on as an editor. Me and Peter Billingsley were not credited as the editors, but we did come in and save that movie. And that's just not my opinion. But that's how movie editing works. When people say movies are saved in the edit, the thing is, what George Lucas shot didn't all work. I mean, with the new effects technology, I don't need to relitigate it. You can read Rinsler's coffee table books on the making of Star Wars, the making of Empire, and the making of Jedi. They're great reading. But I don't think George Lucas ever really had a handle on what Star Wars became, because it was the input of all the great maverick filmmakers of the 70s, whether it was De Palma, whether it was Spielberg, whether it was Coppola, John Milius, all of his friends, and then his wife, of course, Marcia Lucas, came in as an editor on the film, along with Paul Hirsch and Richard Chew, and they really turned that film into something that I don't think George Lucas started out making when he did. But it was all of the input of all of those talented people that shaped Star Wars into something that George Lucas did not necessarily set out to make. I think George Lucas he was shooting a little lower, but his collaborators turned it into something that became, he didn't even think it was going to succeed. He famously went to Hawaii with Steven Spielberg thinking it was a failure. And it obviously wasn't. And it literally changed the world. It changed Hollywood. It changed movies. It changed the public's imagination of what they could expect from film. And of course, if you read Rinsler's book on the making of Empire Strikes Back, George Lucas didn't like that movie at all. He hired his film professor, Irvin Kershner, to direct it and didn't like what Kershner did. He almost lost his shirt and didn't like the fact that the movie cost double what they set out to spend on it. But you can go find out all those stories on your own. They're not exactly hard to find. But now, where are we today? Where is fandom today? We're still getting great adaptations of books. Denis Villeneuve's Dune, the Foundation series, Three Body Problem. We have both the Chinese adaptation and we have the Netflix adaptation. We've had great Game of Thrones and House of the Dragon. Again, literary adaptations. But what I've noticed, especially in fandom, people talk about these things, but they're really... the fandom at large likes to talk about superhero films, and they like to talk about Star Wars. Now, what's interesting about comic book movies is, again, after Star Wars came out, and I would dare say that Star Wars was part of the impetus of this, there was the comic revolution of the 1980s. There was indie publishers, and then there were all the great comics from all the great creators. You had the people, not just like Frank Miller, who was revolutionizing Daredevil, or Chris Claremont revolutionizing the X-Men, but you had other creators. Neil Adams did things. You had Jack Kirby doing interesting things. There was all kinds of indie comics. Howard Chaykin doing American Flag, like I always love to talk about. And then, of course, Alan Moore going from 2000 AD and DR and Quinch to V for Vendetta to Watchmen, Swamp Thing. All that stuff that was happening in the 80s was, I think, a direct result of what the paradigm that Star Wars changed. Science fiction was no longer fringe or science fantasy, but in the wake of Star Wars, you can see how Hollywood pivoted. And from 1978 on, all throughout the 80s, the visions that we received of fantasy films, not so much Sword and Sorcery was kind of, it never really had its breakthrough for a long time. It tried. Dragon Slayer, Krull, You're the Hunter from the Future. There was a lot of, and then all the low-budget Italian movies. There was a lot of, they tried, but there was never the great Excalibur. That was a little more highbrow. John Borman. And, of course, John Borman went from giving us Deliverance and Point Blank to giving us Exorcist 2 and Zardoz, which, by the way, if you watch Exorcist 2 and Zardoz as a double feature, come back to me and tell me what you think about those two, because while The Exorcist 2 is a terrible sequel to The Exorcist, if you just think of it as The Heretic and you watch it, you can't not think of it as an Exorcist sequel, because it has Linda Blair playing Reagan McNeil in it. But, John Borman's passions, I think I've always said that Exorcist 2 has more in common with Excalibur and Zardoz than it does with The Exorcist. But that's just me. And I leave that for you to decide. But I do think now, I remember watching Star Wars at 10 years old, and one of my favorite scenes in it was the Imperial briefing scene when you first get to the Death Star. Dun, 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 dun. Until this battle station is fully operational, we are vulnerable. The Rebel Alliance is too well equipped. Dangerous to your Starfleet commander, not to this battle station. Those guys, and I'm like, look at those guys. In the middle of Star Wars, they cut to this scene. And then, of course, Tarkin walks in, talks about dissolving the Imperial Senate, and then they talk to Darth Vader about his sad devotion to that ancient religion, and you get to see a little taste of the Force being used. And it at the forefront were not the Jedi. At the forefront was the Empire. Tarkin, I mean, Vader was a secondary villain. He was scary because you saw him. He was a henchman. He was Odd Job or Jaws, which came out, the Jaws, I mean, Richard Kiel and Spy Who Loved Me. But Tarkin was the lead villain in Star Wars. I mean, you could say Vader, but really Vader worked for Tarkin. Governor Tarkin. I recognized your foul stench when I was brought on board. Charming to the last. You don't know how hard I found it signing the order to terminate your life. I mean, this was great, great, great stuff. But it was great stuff to me because I'd had a pretty extensive education in science fiction, fantasy, and horror, both in what was available in terms of media, and admittedly not a lot of it was that memorable, but mostly I was reading. And I was coming face to face with heady concepts. And it gave me a greater appreciation. I knew a little bit more about what they were driving at, because I could sit there and go, oh, there's a little bit of Dune in Star Wars, isn't there? Which meant that what was going on, and again, Dune, when I read Dune, it was a little beyond me. But to be fair, I read Dune after I saw Star Wars, but it was apparent to me that George Lucas had taken some shit from Frank Herbert. And all of it was, again, it all came around. I mean, if you think about I Am Legend, Richard Matheson's I Am Legend, by the time I saw Mega Man before I saw Last Man on Earth, it had been adapted twice. I mean, Invasion of the Body Snatchers had been adapted, well, in 1978, it also had been adapted twice. So these science fiction literary works were also very important as far as movies went. And as a film fan, you wanted to go back and read the original novel. Before John Carpenter's Thing came out, I had read John W. Campbell's story, Who Goes There? I'd read that already. And that was because you had to, didn't you? Couldn't be a respectable fan. You couldn't go to a convention and expect to be able to talk the talk if you didn't know all of this stuff. It was all part of the same continuum. Well, here's the thing. The world has changed a lot. And the one thing that sort of really sticks in my craw is a lot of the people that fandom isn't reading anymore. They're not reading comics like they used to, which I can understand. They're not reading the great science fiction classics. Maybe some people, as I pointed out, I love YouTube channels like Quinn's Ideas, who goes in and talks about books. There's a lot of good book-only sci-fi channels. Impression Blend, not just because she's a beautiful woman, but she also has great taste in science fiction and especially horror. She reads books. I like to see fandom reading books because it all feeds into the same thing. To read a great science fiction book is to then want to go out and experience more science fiction. Just like seeing a great movie is important when you want to go see another movie because you want to repeat that experience. Now, I got a couple articles I want to read. The first article I want to read, I don't remember the date. I have to look and see what date this article is. Let me see if I can get to it before we get to it. So this article, okay, here it is. All I had to do was scroll up to the top. Here's the article I want to read. The Science of Reading. What is prior knowledge and why is it important? Prior knowledge, like you mean what you might learn in school? Ah, yes. This is by Alyssa Bukela, and it was published February 24th, 2022. Dr. Hollis Scarborough's Reading Rope famously shows us that reading is one of the most complex things that we do on a routine basis. Skilled reading requires fluent and coordinated execution of both word recognition and language comprehension. But viewing these components as a set of discrete skills to be mastered misses the central role that prior knowledge plays in the reading process. I always say that people can know how to read, but are they literate? And I feel that way about movies too. Now here's a really interesting chart. The many strands that are woven into skilled reading. I love this. Language comprehension, background knowledge, facts, concepts, etc. Vocabulary, breadth, precision, links, etc. Language structures, syntax, semantics, etc. Verbal reasoning, inference, metaphor, etc. Literacy knowledge, print concepts, genres, etc. Then you've got word recognition, phonological awareness, decoding, sight recognition, and all of it spins together into skilled reading. I've said the same thing about watching movies. Anybody can watch a movie, but what kind of prior knowledge do you have going in? Do you understand and can you make distinctions or can you make connections to what you're seeing? Is there information in the real world that a filmmaker just expects the audience to know? Anyway, but this is what I'm always saying. The many strands that are woven into skilled reading are also the many strands that are woven into skilled watching. The known words, lived experiences, and concepts we have about the world are vital resources for reading and learning. In fact, numerous studies show that background knowledge affects students' reading comprehension, memory, fluency, and reading speed. In 1988, Donna Recht and Lauren Leslie published the landmark baseball study. For this study, pardon me, I've got to just get rid of something on the screen here. For this study, they had students in grades 7 and 8 read a text about a baseball game and then use an 18 by 20 inch replica of a baseball field, complete with 4-inch wooden figures, to reenact the action from the story. Recht and Leslie found that knowledge of baseball had a greater impact than reading ability on how well kids understood the story. As shown in the data below, students with low reading skill did as well as those with high reading skill if they already knew a lot about baseball. For comprehension, knowledge matters more than reading ability. High knowledge, high reading skill, high knowledge, low reading skill, low knowledge, high reading skill, and low knowledge, low reading skill. Pretty fascinating. With the baseball study, Recht and Leslie helped lay a foundation for decades of additional research in the field. In 2021, a systematic review of 23 studies that focused on the links between background knowledge and reading comprehension consistently found that children with more background knowledge could better understand or comprehend texts like living. The researchers found that readers who have strong knowledge of a particular topic, both in terms of quantity and quality of knowledge, are more able to comprehend a text than a similarly cohesive text for which they lack background knowledge. This was evident for both skilled and low-skilled readers. Background knowledge also influences the speed of our cognitive processing and fluency while reading. In one study, researchers said subjects read a text about 4 common diseases, like the flu, where participants were already familiar with the symptoms, and then read a text about 4 uncommon diseases, like typhus, where they were unfamiliar with the symptoms. Using technology to track people's eye movements while they read each text, the researchers found that participants were more likely to reread parts of sentences and look back to previous sentences along the way while reading the unfamiliar text. In other words, readers' speed and processing slowed as they searched for connections and meanings in the text. In 2011, another study looked at oral reading errors in grade 4 readers with above and below average decoding skills when they either had lacked prior knowledge of the passage topic. The study found that prior knowledge of the passage topic significantly increased reading fluency and reduced reading errors for less skilled readers, especially errors based on graphic information. Research tells us that knowledge plays an important role in becoming a proficient reader. Well, now I've always said this about watching movies. And one of the things that I've noticed is the discussion around Andor. And there's a lot of people, call them Star Wars fans, that think that Andor isn't really Star Wars. And that Andor is boring, or Andor is this or not that. Now, to each their own. Everybody's entitled to their own taste. But one of the things that I find interesting is that people who have more interest, at least in my mind, in things like history. I watched an interview with Gilroy today, Tony Gilroy, and he said that he wanted to take one of the things that really interested him in making Andor was he called a movie a short story. And he said that they basically said to him he can make a 1,500 page, meaning a 1,500 page script with all of Andor. And he could take everything he'd ever read about a revolution or an uprising and put it in the context of a Star Wars story. Everything he wanted. And that's why he leapt at the chance to make Andor. And what I find really interesting about the discourse around Andor is that a lot of people have now come to only accept Star Wars as a fantasy, space fantasy. The animated shows, which a lot of people now have seen, you know, they grew up watching, whether it was Rebels, whether it was the Clone Wars, and they gravitate toward that end of the spectrum. But when I first saw Star Wars when I was a kid, it was the Imperials, it was the Empire itself that was overarching. They were the villains. They didn't mention Sith in Star Wars. I'm like, what is a dark? I mean, I read that he was a Dark Lord of the Sith later. You know, you started to see all this meaning creep into, like, they don't say the name of the trash compactor monster in the movie. I didn't know it was the Dianoga. I didn't know that the Cantina band was Phil Grandan and the Modal Nodes. I didn't know that. You know, that all came later. And it was added as Star Wars became more popular. Things were added to the lore. But when you were first watching the film, you could only go by what was in the text. And what was in the text was not necessarily as, I mean, yeah, it was a fairy tale because you're rescuing a princess. But there were other things going on. I mean, Luke had his aunt and uncle wiped out. Uncle Owen and Aunt Beru. I mean, it was brutal. They were fried, you know. And back then, the Empire was the big bad, not the Sith. So in my mind, watching a show like Andor brings Star Wars full circle for me when I get insight and I get to see, well, how did a rebellion begin and what was so bad about the Empire? Now, as a kid, I understand that the Empire was bad because they blow up planets and kill billions of people. But how did an empire, what do these workaday Empire people do? You know, you're watching people that are running the Death Star. So Tarkin and Vader were like at the top. But I also grew up watching World War II movies. And I understood not every movie's about fucking Patton. You know, sometimes you're going to watch The Dirty Dozen, or you're going to watch A Bridge Too Far. You're going to watch movies about workaday grunts, or you're going to still meet generals and majors, but you're going to learn about infantry as well. And so as a kid, I didn't just watch sci-fi, horror, and fantasy films. I watched every movie. And I liked war movies. You know, I liked The Guns of Navarone. I liked The Great Escape. I liked Bridge on the River Kwai. I mean, as a kid, you know, the end of Bridge on the River Kwai, I'm like, oh my God, they ripped that off from Beneath the Planet of the Apes. You know, all this stuff connected together. And it was all part of, and you wanted more of it. It's like, get into my mind, you know, and that was that background information. I could go in, and I saw Beneath the Planet of the Apes before I saw Bridge on the River Kwai. But when I saw Bridge on the River Kwai, I'm like, oh my God. You know, I mean, it was like, I mean, it might not have been that intentional, but you still, even if it wasn't, you still make that connection. I don't want to ruin it for you, but there's definitely a similarity about the movie Bridge on the River Kwai. And if you're a Star Wars fan, if you haven't seen Bridge on the River Kwai, I'd say, why haven't you? You should. Why haven't you seen The Great Escape? So, you know, all of this stuff is analogous to what's going on in Andor. And in 1983, when the Winds of War documentary was on, miniseries, it was my first favorite miniseries was Shogun, but then Winds of War came on, and I was completely enraptured by the Winds of War, which is about these families swept up in the outbreak of war in Europe, and it was like the most incredible thing I'd ever seen. Big, sprawling, epic, romantic, but you can see a lot of the Winds of War in Andor. And so when I'm watching Andor, like this article was saying, I'm bringing to bear all this other knowledge that I've accumulated that makes me appreciate it more. And I'm not saying people can't think it's boring. If you think it's boring, I get it. But I've always thought that boredom is like, look, I'll admit this. If I go see an exhibit at a museum and I don't really know much about what I'm going to see, I'm a little tuned out. If I can't go and do some research online look, I love going to the museum and taking a docent tour or getting the little pamphlets they hang out. And I'm the guy that reads all the plaques. I need to know, because otherwise you're looking at something. If you have no knowledge or no understanding of what you're looking at, it's fucking boring. It is. Now, what I find pretty interesting is nowadays, everybody they're learning from TikTok. They're learning from cursory glances at whatever they're looking at. I'm reading articles in The Atlantic about college kids. They don't read books. They don't have the attention span. They don't have the attention span because they're fucking bored, because they don't know enough about the world around them, nor are they interested in the world around them. And when I'm talking about the world around them, like, there's a reason when you read history or great science fiction, for instance, this book, Lest Darkness Fall, is about a guy who goes to ancient Rome, and it's like, yeah, I can fix this. He travels in time. It's like, I can change things. We can make it better here. And that story, that time travel kind of it never really works out the way you want it to. But having read that book, suddenly I knew more about ancient Rome. And like when I saw I, Claudius for the first time when I was a kid, Boobies on PBS, as I like to call it, it might not have been something because it was shot on videotape. It looks like a soap opera. But because I had seen a lot of movies like Ben-Hur, the movies about Romans. Do you like movies about gladiators? I did. And so it was fascinating. I'm like, this is a different take, but I know a little bit about what's going on, a little bit. But that little bit carried me through that information. Well, I feel like with Andor, there's so much going on, and like, look, you can dismiss it. Everyone talks about it being a Trump allegory, which I don't believe it is. And remember, it was shot 2 years ago. I think, as Tony Gilroy said, he took everything about every different kind of rebellion, every uprising that he'd ever been thinking about, and wanted to distill it all into a story. And the Star Wars universe provided that story for him, which is what science fiction, so much of science fiction is allegory. It uses our world, it uses religion, it uses philosophy. I mean, look what they did with The Matrix. So much of it is that way. And the more you know, and the more you can bring to bear on what you're watching, the less boring it becomes. And that's kind of, all of the stuff that I was filling my head with when I was a kid made me very interested in the world around me. No, it doesn't matter where I would go. Like, you can take me anywhere and I'll be interested in something. I will talk to people. I will find out something I didn't know. Like, I'm the kind of guy that when we moved out to where we live now, there was a section on the freeway that kind of looked like this barren, desolate section. And there's like this huge train yard. And I was like, what's over there? And one day I drove there and I got out of my car and I was wandering around in these giant rusted train cars and, big tanks of something. There used to be something there, but there wasn't anymore. And, I just to see what was there, and where John Campea lives. I asked him where he lives. He kind of is up on a hill above this golf course. And I'm like, what's way over there? If you drive down and go past the freeway and go up the hill, what's up there? And he's like, I don't know. I've never been up there. And I'm like, why? I drove up there once. I went and grabbed some lunch and drove up there and just drove around. And there was a park up there and there's some little small businesses. And I'm like, wow, this is kind of cool. You know, I would never have known that. There's no reason I would have ever had to go there. But I knew more. So every time I get out at his studio in the morning, I can see over there and there's a big kind of an open area of grass. And I'm like, I've been there. I know what that is. and so, you know, and I look at it every day. I look at it and I'm like, huh, you can see that from here. And I've been there for no other reason than I just wanted to see. And what I find so interesting is today somebody said something to me on X. Oh, I know what it was. I had put up the trailer for the new Spike Lee movie, Highest to Lowest. Now, the new Spike Lee movie is a remake, or it's a reimagining of Akira Kurosawa's early 60s movie High and Low, which is itself an adaptation of a book called King's Ransom by an author named Evan Hunter, or more well known as Ed McBain. So Kurosawa was adapting an American writer, a crime novel, in Japanese, but it's about Japanese culture in the early 60s. And this person on Twitter said, I don't understand, like, why should I be excited about this movie? Because it's just Denzel Washington giving a monologue with all of these scenes. And that's what he wrote to me on Twitter today. And I'm like, okay, you have all the knowledge, human knowledge, at your fingertips. A cursory Google search, you could have just put in Highest to Lowest, and it would have told you that it was a remake of one of the greatest film directors of all time, but maybe not a remake, but a reimagining of the same book. I don't know if Spike Lee is adapting Evan Hunter's original novel or he's doing a riff on Kurosawa's actual film. I don't know the answer to that, but it excites me because it's got that kind of Inside Man vibe that I love that Spike Lee movie. It was great. Great caper. But someone's coming at me on Twitter or on X, and they're like, why are you, I just tweeted the trailer and said, oh my God, how good does this look? And a person comes back at me and wants, he's like, oh, it's not that good. Well, I don't understand. It's just a monologue and a bunch of scenes. Well, he didn't know. And he didn't take the time to find fucking out. So I wrote him back. I wasn't a prick, really. But I said, well, it's because, you know, it's an adaptation of, I said that, of Kurosawa's movie that was itself an adaptation of American writer Evan Hunter's book. But he didn't even take the time to learn. Like, he saw my tweet, and rather than say to himself, I wonder why Rob Burnett tweeted out, I watched this trailer, I'm not too excited about it. Why is Rob Burnett excited about it? But instead, he just decided to tweet to me, this isn't very impressive. I don't know why you'd be so excited about it. It's just a monologue with a bunch of scenes. And in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, you have the entire internet and you have Google at your fingertips. You would rather write to me and tell me that you're unimpressed with a trailer and you want to know why I'm excited about it. I cannot tell you how angry and frustrated this makes me, because I am here trying to be a purveyor of imagination and storytelling and learning and trying to get more out of life through expanding your imagination through, you know, knowledge. And every single day someone comes at me and like, they're like, well, I don't know why you're excited about this. I'm like, why don't you try and figure it out? But the impulse is, you could literally, it'll take you less time to type the title of that movie in, and you'll get back some information immediately, whether you want to read the Wikipedia page, whether you want to go to IMDb, whether you want to read a Deadline article about how the movie started, whether you want to see that it's playing in the Cannes Film Festival out of competition this year. It's all right fucking there. And no one takes the fucking time. And I don't understand that. I honestly don't understand why it is that we live in a world where literally at a couple of keystrokes, you can find out so much, but you'd rather write back to me going, it's mid. If I tweet something, not everything, but if I tweet about a movie that I like, there's a reason why. I could give you an entire backstory, But wouldn't it be more fun if you discover it for yourself and go, I wonder why, that Rob Burnett thinks this is cool. I don't see what's so cool about it. Let me do some fucking research. That's what I did. And I didn't have the internet when I was a kid. I'd read something and be like, what is this? I had the World Book Encyclopedia, which wasn't as good as the Encyclopedia Britannica, but my parents bought me the World Book Encyclopedia. They bought me an encyclopedia, and an encyclopedia guy came to our door, and I begged him to get the encyclopedia for me because everything was in there. Whenever I had spare time, I used to pull down encyclopedia and read them. Of course, certain letters were more interesting than other letters just because there was more stuff in them. But I mean, I just don't understand. And where I really don't get it is when it comes to fandom. What happened to fandom? What happened to that insatiable curiosity and all of those connections that would fire up when even in Marvel Comics, they would give you notes that said, well, the first appearance of this was in blah, 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 editor, or Excelsior or whatever. And you'd be like, I got to go get that comic. Like that Superman comic with Captain Thunder when it's clearly fucking Shazam. And I'm like, why is this Captain Thunder? I was perplexed by this. Captain Thunder, Superman. It's a classic. One day I got to get a 9/8 slabbed version of that Captain Thunder comic just because I want it on my wall, because it was one of those things where I remember buying it off the rack. I bought it off a spindle rack, and I'm like, I don't understand this. Captain Thunder? And I believe it came out when Shazam and ISIS were on TV, and I just didn't get it. I'm like, what? Somebody explain. And there was no internet. I couldn't figure out why the fuck was Shazam Captain Thunder, even though it was a badass cover with Superman and Captain Thunder. I didn't know, but it's in my mind. I'm like, I had to know. And what I don't get is what has happened to fandom. Where did the curiosity go? It's like that old Ted Lasso thing. Whenever you're doom scrolling through TikTok or Instagram, it always comes down to when Ted Lasso's playing darts with Giles from Buffy, and Ted Lasso talks about being curious because Giles thinks he's going to take him in a game of darts in the pub. And Ted Lasso talks about the benefits of being curious. I'm like, fuck yeah, that's it. That is it. I'd put this on that channel. I would put that on this channel every day before I have a show because it would, but I'd get demonetized, so I can't do it. But it is on Reels. But I just don't understand. We have this fandom where, especially a show like Andor, there is so much rich human history to understand that Tony Gilroy, clearly the writer, as somebody said, Jonathan Voico was saying, episode 8 of Andor, it's like Les Mis without the music, or whatever it is he said. And I'm thinking, I wonder if you said that, how many people would know if you just said Les Mis, if they would even catch what you said. And I'm not saying everyone's dumb, but what I am saying is that people, especially fans, have forgotten their curiosity. They would much rather, like, why do you think that, highest to lowest is so great? Like, they would rather come at me and, like, disparage me rather than and if they looked into it, maybe they'd be as excited about it as I am, which means they would benefit. They would be excited too. They would have something that's amazing that they could talk about. So, it's funny when you watch a show like Andor, if you don't like it, what about trying to figure out, well, there's a lot of people that do. What am I missing? I've thought that, there are things like, you could say that about the Goonies. I saw the Goonies when it first came out. I hated it. And there's a lot of people now they're mad at me again. They're throwing things at the screen. God damn it, Rob, how can you say that? I was too old. I wrote an article for my high school newspaper about that movie, how it had gratuitous kissing. And I loved kissing. But, I was a little old. But you understand that now. You like things when you like them. I don't begrudge anybody that loves Return of the Jedi, even though Return of the Jedi for me was the most disappointing cinematic experience I ever had in my life. Because Star Wars and Empire expanded my horizons by a wide margin. I was expecting Return of the fucking King. And remember, even when you talk about books that you've read, back then, fantasy, there wasn't really, like Julian May's Saga of Pliocene Exile hadn't been written yet. If you read, back when I was a kid, there was Lord of the Rings and there was Thomas Covenant, the Unbeliever, and then there was the Shannara books, Terry Brooks' Shannara books. I got The Sword of Shannara, and I found out directly from him it's Shannara. I called it Shannara or Shannara, but it's Shannara, according to him, because I interviewed him. When I read that book, it was clearly, a Lord of the Rings riff. But those books were so... Lord of the Rings, to me, is the gold standard of world building. And if you're not on that wavelength, Tolkien set the bar, and everybody looks at that bar and uses it. If you're writing fantasy, it doesn't matter what it is, the Lord of the Rings still stands tall because no one has done the world building that Professor Tolkien has done. And everybody wants to come in now, and that's why I think fandom gets so annoyed when lore is so disrespected. Like if you're a Doctor Who fan, you ask yourself, why does somebody have to come in and retcon the origin of the Doctor just so you can do something and say it's your own? But it isn't your own. You didn't create that. You didn't create that lore. You came in. Why not just respect it? Being a fan today, that's something that is tough. But I think what really hurts fandom the most today is people don't want to do the work. They're content, and that's fine. I'm not saying that I'm not fan blaming. It's our entire civilization doesn't want to do the work. And how do I know that? Let me read you a tale that was in New York Magazine today. And before somebody accuses me of liberal bias or something, let me read you this article. Everyone is cheating their way through college. ChatGPT has unraveled the entire academic project. Chung-In Roy Lee stepped on by the way, this is by James D. Walsh, and it was published in One Great Story, the New York's Reading Recommendation newsletter. This was published today. Chung-In Roy Lee stepped onto Columbia University's campus this past fall and, by his own admission, proceeded to use generative artificial intelligence to cheat on nearly every assignment. As a computer science major, he depended on AI for his introductory programming classes. I just dumped the prompt into ChatGPT and hand in whatever it spat out. By his rough math, AI wrote 80% of every essay he turned in. At the end, I'd put on the finishing touches. I'd just insert 20% of my own humanity, my voice into it, Lee told me recently. Lee was born in South Korea and grew up outside Atlanta, where his parents run a college prep consulting business. He said he was admitted to Harvard early in his senior year of high school, but the university rescinded its offer after he was suspended for sneaking out during an overnight field trip before graduation. A year later, he applied to 26 schools. He didn't get into any of them. So he spent the next year at a community college before transferring to Columbia. His personal essay, which turned his winding road to higher education into a parable for his ambition to build companies, was written with help from ChatGPT. When he started at Columbia as a sophomore this past September, he didn't worry much about academics or his GPA. Most assignments in college are not relevant, he told me. They're hackable by AI, and I just had no interest in doing them. While other new students fretted over the university's rigorous core curriculum, described by the school as intellectually expansive and personally transformative, Lee used AI to breeze through with minimal effort. When I asked him why he had gone through so much trouble to get into an Ivy League university only to offload all of the learning to a robot, he said, "It's the best place to meet your co-founder and your wife." By the end of his first semester, Lee checked off one of those boxes. He met a co-founder, Neil Shamugam, a junior in the School of Engineering, and together they developed a series of potential startups: a dating app just for Columbia students, a sales tool for liquor distributors, and a note-taking app. None of them took off. Then Lee had an idea. As a coder, he had spent some 600 miserable hours on LeetCode, a training platform that prepares coders to answer the algorithmic riddles tech companies ask job and internship candidates during interviews. Lee, like many young developers, found the riddles tedious and mostly irrelevant to the work coders might actually do on the job. What's the point? What if they built a program that hid AI from browsers during remote job interviews so that the interviewees could cheat their way through instead? In February, Lee and Shanmugam launched a tool that did just that. Interview Coder's website featured a banner that read, "Fuck LeetCode." Lee posted a video of himself on YouTube using it to cheat his way through an internship interview with Amazon. He actually got the internship but turned it down. A month later, Lee was called into Columbia's Academic Integrity Office. The school put him on disciplinary probation after a committee found him guilty of advertising a link to a cheating tool and providing students with the knowledge to access this tool and use it how they see fit, according to the committee's report. Lee thought it absurd that Columbia, which had a partnership with ChatGPT's parent company OpenAI, would punish him for innovating with AI. Although Columbia's policy on AI is similar to that of many other universities, students are prohibited from using it unless their professor explicitly permits them to do so, either on a class-by-class or case-by-case basis. Lee said he doesn't know a single student at school who isn't using AI to cheat. To be clear, Lee doesn't think this is a bad thing. I think we are years or months probably away from a world where nobody thinks using AI for homework is considered cheating, he said. In January 2023, just 2 months after OpenAI launched ChatGPT, a survey of 1,000 college students found that nearly 90% of them had used the chatbot to help with homework assignments. In its first year of existence, ChatGPT's total monthly visits steadily increased month over month until June, when schools let out for the summer. That wasn't an anomaly. Traffic dipped again over the summer in 2024. Professors and teaching assistants increasingly found themselves staring at essays filled with clunky robotic phrasing that, although grammatically flawless, didn't sound quite like a college student or even a human. 2.5 years later, students at large state schools, the Ivies, liberal arts schools in New England, universities abroad, professional schools, and community colleges are relying on AI to ease their way through every facet of their education. Generative AI chatbots, ChatGPT, but also Google's Gemini, Anthropic's Claude, Microsoft's Camelot, or Copilot, and others take their notes during class, devise their study guides and practice tests, summarize novels and textbooks, and brainstorm, outline, and draft their essays. STEM students are using AI to automate their research and data analyses and to sail through dense coding and debugging assignments. College is just how well I can use ChatGPT at this point. A student in Utah recently captioned a video of herself copy and pasting a chapter from her genocide and mass atrocity textbook into ChatGPT. Sarah, a freshman at Wilfrid Laurier University in Ontario, said she first used ChatGPT to cheat during the spring semester of her final year of high school. Sarah's name, like those of other current students in this article, have been changed for privacy. After getting acquainted with the chatbot, Sarah used it for all of her classes: Indigenous Studies, Law, English, and a hippie farming class called Green Industries. "My grades were amazing," she said. "It changed my life." Sarah continued to use AI when she started college this past fall. Why wouldn't she? Rarely did she sit in class and not see other students' laptops open to ChatGPT. Toward the end of the semester, she began to think she might be dependent on the website. She already considered herself addicted to TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, and Reddit, where she writes under the username maybe I'm not smart. I can't read maybe I'm not smart. "I spend so much time on TikTok," she says, "hours and hours until my eyes start hurting, which makes it hard to plan and do my schoolwork. With ChatGPT, I can write an essay in 2 hours that normally takes 12. You get the idea. I read this and I think to myself, now I don't know if anybody watching this remembers this. Some people do because they're around my age and they're a little bit younger. We had something called Cliff's Notes. It had a yellow and black cover. A yellow and black cover. And what it would take famous works of literature and it would distill them into a synopsis, and then it would give you a breakdown of the characters and what the themes were and what it all meant. And it was a pamphlet size. It was like a digest size version of a book. So if you had to read Dostoevsky's War and Peace or something, you didn't have to read the whole book. You could read the Cliff's Notes and get through. But even then, and I'm not gonna lie, there were times I used Cliff Notes in college and in high school. I never felt good about it. And I always knew that reading the entire book would be a much more pleasurable experience because I love to read. And you really, it's like one of the things I've learned about movies is I don't care how many spoilers you have or know. I don't care how many reviews you've read. I've learned throughout my life that nothing you cannot truly understand or experience a movie till you see it, hopefully in a theater. Or until you sit down and watch it on a decent system, without having to stop every 5 minutes to listen to people or do stuff. A synopsis does not replace actually experiencing the entire movie and letting it wash over you. And I read this and, I don't deny. It does not surprise me that everybody's using ChatGPT. The problem is if you're using ChatGPT for everything, well, like we talked about how comprehending reading requires you to bring in with it. It's like, what's in the cave? Only what you take with you. Well, if you have nothing to take with you, what the fuck are you going to do? What are you going to know? When you're 30 years old, how are you going to have any kind of grounding into who and what you are, what you believe, where you want to go, where you've been? And I feel that fandom is kind of in this place. I feel like today's fandom is all using ChatGPT. If that, maybe they just come and ask me, I don't understand why you're so excited about this trailer. And I'll answer them. And then they go, oh, I don't know who Akira Kurosawa is. I don't know who Evan Hunter is. I don't know who Ed McBain is. I don't know what High and Low's even about. Nor do I understand why Spike Lee wanted to remake it, especially apparently in New York City in the hip hop world. I have no idea why I'd want to do that. Which means you're not engaged in any way, shape, or form. But if you were engaged and you saw that trailer and you said, damn, that looks fucking good. A new Spike Lee joint. His riff on Kurosawa. I was not so keen on his Old Boy riff. I was like, I didn't see the necessary, why'd you need to do that? Because there's a little too much Asian in Old Boy. That's why it was so great. That movie does not work outside of where it's coming from. If you're in Korea, okay, I'll buy it. But in America, not so much. But the story is very interesting. Class struggle, business, all that. But I feel that fandom has forgotten the joy of what about everything you can be a fan of and how all of it feeds into everything else. And Andor, I think, is a perfect litmus test. Now, I understand there's some people that, hey, they want their Jedi, they want their lightsabers and all that, but that to me is so limiting because that's the Star side of Star Wars. I like the war side. That's the thing that attracted me. Sure, did I like Han Solo and Luke? Yeah, but even if they weren't going to rescue Princess Leia, I could have watched those two. They might have had to have gone to the Death Star to do something, get themselves captured, men on a mission. That's what they were. They were men on a mission. People talk about it being, yes, it's a fairy tale in space. I get all that. And like the critic who watched it in the beginning, I think that guy was a total wet blanket. And you notice he said, if I had children, I don't think that guy ever went down on a woman in his life. He wouldn't have known what to do. He probably thinks the little man in the boat was really a little man in a boat. Did not understand a 45-degree upturned tip of the tongue going from 60 beats per minute all the way up to 128 beats and reacting to it. He didn't know fuck all about any of that. But you know what? When he was talking about Star Wars, you're looking at a guy like, here's a guy who's like the opposite direction. He's never understood. Like, he's telling kids to go see Tender Mercies. That's a great movie. Tender Mercies is a great movie. And you might, if you're a certain kind of kid. I mean, this was an old guy who has forgotten what it's like. I bet that guy was old when he came out of the womb. I do not understand why YouTube does this. At least I've learned to stop myself. But it's incredibly frustrating. Now, as I am wont to do, I have a letter. I have a letter that I would like to share with all of you. And it's from, let's see, I want to make sure that it's from Mike Gallagher. And if you want to write me a letter, you can, rmburnett1701@gmail.com. Put in the subject headline, Letter for Robservations. Here's the letter. Hey, Rob, I wanted to weigh in on the Star Wars debate raging recently. Hang on, I got to open this up. I think this is a debate between two factions that focus on world building and losing the message of the franchise when working for a mass audience. One focuses on the deep dive into the sci-fi of it all, which I'll condescendingly call, how do you get promoted in the ISB crowd? The other focuses on the fantasy side, which I'll condescendingly call, how do lightsabers turn red crowd? But I'll focus on a different angle. That is the real story, the theme, and the message. A story to illustrate how I think the fandom works, I play a game called State of Decay. I follow one of the devs on Twitch and YouTube who, interestingly, is Orson Scott Card's son. The game at one point had 3 difficulty levels of Standard, Dread, and Nightmare. The online community had beaten them all and were ready for a new challenge. The studio announced a new difficulty level, Green. This was easier than the rest. The community freaked out. How dare they make it an easier level when the fans wanted it more difficult? Little did they know that a harder level was being developed. Once that was released, everything calmed down. But the dev was talking about it, and when they looked at the data about how people played the green level, it was far more popular than the harder ones. His takeaway was that a loud part of the community was a small percentage, but great ambassadors of the game. You can't ignore them, but you cannot ignore the majority of your players. In this case, it was around 90% versus 10%. For Star Wars, I think the world-building fans are the small but loud part of the fan base. The rest love Star Wars, but don't think too much about it. The message and themes work the heart and not the head. The stories stand on their own. I've heard you say that the films are about the Civil War since it starts with, it is a period of civil war. That sounds like a pretty good argument, but how does Rocky start? With a boxing match. But it is not a boxing movie. It is a love story. The boxing is the setting. You could change it to anything you wanted, and the love story would remain. If you aren't convinced about Rocky, see how it ends. You can barely hear the decision about who won the fight. Apollo is celebrating in the background, yet we clearly see and hear Rocky and Adrian calling out to each other and declaring their love. I would disagree with that. Rocky is, yes, a love story, but it's also about a man being who he was destined to be, a man digging deep inside of himself and overcoming his circumstances. Because if he didn't do that, he wouldn't have won Adrian's heart. It works in tandem, and it works together. Anyway, the Empire is a symbol of an oppressive system that dehumanizes. For this argument, I'm going with Kirk's everybody's human. That system can be government, bureaucracy, technology, industrialization, family, religion, culture, or just your own beliefs. The rebels, the force, etc. are symbols of freedom, life, nature, love, and following your bliss. The Jedi Sith are two sides of human nature, calm, selfless love and passive versus hate, possessiveness, even in love, and aggression. The Empire is shown in artificial environments where nothing grows versus the natural environments of the rebels. They rely too much on technology. The stormtroopers and Vader look kind of robotic. He's more machine now than man. Lightsaber colors are a favorite discussion among the fantasy world builders. The real answer is red symbolizes destruction and danger, green and blue, nature and peace. Purple symbolizes that the actor wanted to stand out in a huge fight scene. The oppressive systems pop up all over the franchise. The Empire, the Republic that can't do anything, the Jedi Order forbidding attachments, Uncle Owen not letting Luke go to the Academy, the Bounty Hunter Code, the Mandalorian Creed, and the isolation and being ruled by AI of attention. It is humanity and love that usually defy and defeat these systems. In the first film, Luke turns off his targeting computer to follow his instinct, aka the Force, and then loses the friendly tech of R2, but he can't destroy the Death Star until Han saves him. In fact, Luke is saved at the end of all 3 films of the original trilogy by someone that loves him. Contrast that with Anakin's toxic love of Padme. He did not follow 38 Special's advice to hold on loosely. But Return of the Jedi, he is redeemed and loves Luke selflessly. Anakin grows up in the Jedi Order. It is sterile and forbids attachments. Could anything be more dehumanizing? Once he leaves his mother, he says how cold it is. Padme gives him a blanket. Then he loses Qui-Gon, who still believed in attachment, and is left alone and cold. He is obsessed over Padme for 10 years, and then the love becomes toxic and his fate is sealed. Mando gives up his codes for the love of Grogu. The kids at Atin save their planet by calling for help. I saw on Reddit that most species have their main. Oh, that's fucking. Now I get it. It's why am I drawing a blank? Jude Law, Skeleton Crew. I saw on Reddit that most species have their main survival. I've never read that before. I saw on Reddit that most species have their main survival skill at birth. Snakes bite. Horses run, human babies cry, which is asking for help. Helping each other is how we survive, humanity over oppression. One more major theme I want to mention, generations. Luke's journey in the original trilogy mirrors about as well as I've seen the psychological journey most of us go through with our parents. As kids, we think they're perfect, then we are teens who think we're perfect and find out our parents are flawed, and finally we mature into adults and reconcile the good and bad in our parents. We hopefully recognize our own flaws and resolve not to make the mistakes our parents did. This redeems our parents in our eyes. You can even see that pattern in society. Some say the founding fathers were perfect, others say evil. The mature amongst us see them as flawed people of their time who did something remarkable. But remember, the founding fathers were basically just out of being the teenagers they were and in their early 20s. Jyn goes through this journey in Rogue One with her father. She thinks he's great, then a bad guy, then sees the good in him. The beauty of these themes and messages is that they work subconsciously and emotionally. The world-building fans want to get deep dives into the lore, but can miss out on the message. Andor message is fine, but surface level. It takes a symbol and makes it too specific. The fantasy crowd that looks at lightsaber colors and techniques are also missing the message. We can have those deep dives, but they can't draw a crowd without the subconscious and emotional messages. Take care, Mike Gallagher. Look, I would say that those are great points to make, but I would also say that a story like Andor is also reflecting back, like Tony Gilroy said, on our culture, human culture today. What is a revolution? Why do people revolt? And it's true, the Empire is dehumanizing and the rebels are out in the woods. I liked how you put that, and that's also very true, and everything you wrote is true as well. But when it comes down to that, I think that stories like Star Wars and Andor have more than just those two sides. I mean, look, I think one of the great depictions of the Force, I really think that even George Lucas, he set it out in Star Wars, and Empire as well. The Force surrounds us and binds us. You don't need to be part of a blood lineage to be strong with the Force. The Force is something that surrounds us and binds us, everything. If you can figure out a way to tap into it, maybe some people are more adept than others. In the case of Luke, I guess there's a blood lineage there, which I always hated, by the way. But in Andor, you see somebody who's a healer, somebody who's not a Jedi. As a matter of fact, they haven't even mentioned, they've barely touched on the Jedi at all because they've fallen. They fell years ago. Their fire has gone out of the universe. But when you see a Force healer, Andor didn't even believe in the Force. And yet this Force healer she's like, I don't even know why I've come to you. But there was something in his spirit that was echoing in the living Force. And that's why a Force healer could feel it. Which means that people can be Force beacons or Force sensitive without even knowing it, which is something I always believed in when I saw Star Wars and Empire and Jedi. It didn't make sense to me. I mean, Luke didn't even know what the Force was. The Force? Well, it's an energy field that surrounds us. Han Solo didn't either. So, but it's a good letter, and I want to thank you for writing in. And again, I think, look, Star Wars became more fantasy-oriented. And I think a lot of that was due to the expanded universe, which leaned into the stars of it all and less of the wars. And, you know, it's interesting because I'm a big fan of the Japanese, Mobile Suit Gundam. And Gundam's been going on now. It's a little younger than Star Wars because it debuted in 1979, hence the laser swords. But it's clearly, I mean, Gundam has always been a war story. And they've had alternate universe Gundams and they've got side stories and all that. But for the most part, the Universal Century is a story about an Earth conflict, the Principality of Xeon and the Earth Federation. And it's always been, so it's always been kind of more the war side of things because they don't have the Force. So, I mean, they have new types, but it's you get into which is, I guess, kind of the Force if you want to, well, maybe they're more similar than I care to admit. But I was very much attracted to Gundam because of the war side of it all. Let's see what you guys are saying. I'm sorry I haven't looked into people's chats, but let's go look at them now. Port Film Co-op says, "Stop talking about Star Wars and grow up, man-child." Okay. I mean, it just happens to be a show that's on right now. But why are you telling anybody? Here's another thing. Why are you telling anybody to not talk about something? People should be talking about things. To say to not talk about them is counterproductive. And you come from a Port Film Co-op? Let me guess, you're watching Meshes in the Afternoon all the time. Darth Plato says lots of people in schools, academics look down their noses at fantasy and sci-fi as if fantasy and sci-fi is a subculture and subtracts from art. Is that still true, though? Because there's so many great works of science fiction that have been recognized as such. I don't know. Paul Allan Bernato's feeling better after suffering a stroke. So it's good to see you here, man. Hi, Rob. I assume science fiction is your favorite genre in books and films. It's mine because there's no limit to the imagination when creating sci-fi. Actually, I love science fiction, but I also love horror, great horror, and I also love detective fiction. Modern detective fiction. Whether I read a lot of Michael Connelly's stuff, I read a lot of Andrew Vaugh's, James Lee Burke, modern noir. I've been reading a lot of Max Allan Collins lately, just because I've become a little familiar with his work. So yeah. But I do love science fiction because science fiction is so broad based. There's space opera, there's techno, alternate universes, cyberpunk. I mean, there's all kinds of things. There's the clash between science and faith with books like The Sparrow. Where is Doc sends in a $20 super chat. Finished The Devils by Joe Abercrombie. Monks, werewolf, wizard, and a vampire sent by the Pope to save a princess from an evil witch in an avalanche of sex, bloody gore, and narrated by Blake Seven, Stephen Pacey. Thought of you, Rob. Well, I want to be thought of when you're listening to that. That sounds great. Thomas Logan says, The Hollywood Reporter says 2061 Odyssey 3 adaptation coming from Warner Brothers starring Cynthia Erivo as Haywood Floyd and Bella Ramsey as Chris Floyd. Elliot Page will direct. Hey, that, there you go. Royalston Bailey says no mods tonight. Spammer in the chat. Well, I apologize for that. I don't know what the spammer is doing. Battle Mage Nerd has become a new member. Thanks for that. Appreciate that. Hoop Baby 07 or 07 says, would you be okay with Iron Man 4 that's based on Tony going to the future to learn how time messes back or spends time with adult Morgan and inspires him to help Endgame? No. I don't. I would not in the MCU. Maybe as a comic story you could do that, but as a movie, not so sure. I think that if you taking away from Tony Stark's death in any way, shape, or form, I think is a bad idea. Graham off topic says, Rob, off topic, but if you could rewrite any Star Trek episode that you feel didn't quite hit the mark, but was a cool episode, which would you rewrite? Well, if I thought it was a cool episode, well, I would tell you I would rewrite the entirety of Star Trek Discovery and all of Strange New Worlds. I mean, I know that's kind of that's a tough question to say because I'm thinking about the entirety of the original series of Next Generation, of Deep Space Nine, of Voyager, of Enterprise. And I mean, I don't think in those kinds of terms. There's a lot of Star Trek episodes. Look, you know what? If I could change any Star Trek episode, okay, here's what popped into my head. The Way to Eden, the space hippie episode. I would get rid of all of this hippie iconography from the 60s. All the bare feet, and I would give them something else and make them less space hippies and make them seekers. People that are seeking Eden. I think that episode's actually a much better episode than people give it credit for, but it's so on the nose with it's the space hippies. It ruins the whole thing. That's what I would do. I would change that episode and make the space hippies much more credible, because the fact that Spock admires them and like he agrees to like help look for Eden, and that's an episode that I would change. Shinotsky says the 1960s sci-fi editors, Futarians, buried and actively destroyed God knows how many pulp works over to further their technocratic propaganda. Hey, it's true. That kind of stuff happens. And it's too bad. I mean, we've always had people that are furthering their own agendas, which we see on a daily basis, which is too bad. But a lot of great stuff did come out of the 60s, and a lot of that stuff went through the cracks. Ryan says, Disney Star Wars has been awful, but Andor is excellent. And I'm tired of some Star Wars content creators, Leia cosplayer who plays to thirsty bottom feeders, who've built brands on hating everything just to get views and sell merch. Look, we're going to get that. One of the byproducts of this era is I don't play the algorithms. I had Jack Reed sent me an amazing way that I could totally revolutionize this channel and make it much better and much more lucrative, maybe more interesting for people. He's the guy that edited the Star Wars video that I just dropped. Yeah, I mean, look, there's always going to be those content creators, and there's a lot of thirsty guys out there. Look, I'm just happy guys are still thirsty at all. That was another thing about science fiction, fantasy, and horror. It made me a horny kid, man. I was a horny kid. To watch Star Trek was to be horny. There was always beautiful women on that show, beautiful, smart women that commanded starships or were scientists or, hot robots. I mean, there was always something to love on Star Trek. And the women on Star Trek they had big hips and they were busty and they were feminine and they completely changed my, they made me the man I am today. And I'm always thirsty. B Things says that the trouble is that everyone has cats now, and you know what curiosity does to cats. Well, Jermaninen, all the way from Finland. Sinners and Andor, such a great week. Any book requests or recommendations? Well, any of the books at the front of this show, if you've never read them. You know, look, those Alfred Bester books, The Star's My Destination or The Demolished Man, read those. Or a book that I dearly love that I've recommended before, Clifford D. Simak. He wrote it. It was up for, I think it won the Hugo in 1963. Way Station. I was looking into getting the rights to that. I really wanted to write and direct Way Station. And then I think Matt Reeves' friends came in and I just started making phone calls and inquiring about the rights, and then they must have bought the same reprint that I did, and somebody read it and said, let's go. But of course it's not getting made. I'd really like to do it though. You make Way Station. Way Station would be the great science fiction movie to do for A24. Practical creatures, it'd be great. Royston S. Bailey says, social media has lobotomized humanity. Well, I would tend to agree with that. It's an evolution, but think about it. We are going through an evolution right now. The human animal is going through an evolutionary period of time brought on by social media. The back end of whatever, or maybe the middle part of this evolution is going to be where AI takes us, which is going to be really difficult to get through. But yeah, it has lobotomized humanity. But again, it's part of the evolution. Where are we going to be in another 20 years, and another 40 years, and another 60 years? So, yeah. Modern Age Nerd says, my curiosity of Star Wars led me down a rabbit hole of film knowledge, not sci-fi. Like an actor or writer involved, I watch all their prior works. I'm a film fan first, not a member of any fandom. Okay. Well, I would say that's what I was. I mean, I was a film fan more than anything. Hence all the movies I cited at the beginning, because I was watching movies, but I was also, you know, I would say being a Star Wars fan or a science fiction fan is just a sub. Like, I'm a film fan, but I love gangster movies. You know, I love science fiction films. I love horror films. I love great dramas. I love rom-coms. I'm a fan of those genres, but I'm still overall mostly a film fan. That's what started it all. B Thing says, I was a TA for an ethics class from 2021 to 2023. It was amazing how students' work tanked when AI started getting big in 22. Also, irony regarding ethics. DUI Champ says, evening, sir. You mentioned your upcoming story contest over the weekend. Would you know what your word count limitations are? Nothing over 10,000 words. Nothing over 10,000 words. But yeah, that seems like a good number. BCH. We've had plenty of Jedi, Sith, and lightsabers. Some of the mystery is lost now, particularly when we learn that the Jedi are kind of assholes. I agree. You know, I mean, we've seen the Star Wars criminal element, the Star Wars Jedi, the Star Wars, you know, now we've seen how the rebellion is, and we've seen Skeleton Crew, so we've seen other aspects there. But, you know, it would be interesting to see, look, I've joked about it, but I would love to see, like, a biopic about Phil Grindan and the Modal Nodes. I never say it right. And the band, the Cantina Band. We did see a little bit of that in one of the tales of in an early one of the animated anthologies, but it would be really interesting to see. You know, what's never really been examined. I mean, one of the things that fascinates me about Andor is that Luthen does really sell art, and we've seen that art does. There are people that collect art, and there's artifacts. We saw, you know, here's a gift of one of 8 in the universe. I mean, You could do Raiders of the Lost Ark in the Star Wars universe if you wanted to. I mean, they always connect everything to the Jedi and the Sith, but that's like connecting everything to the Catholic Church and I don't know, vampires or something. But there's so much more out there that you could tell stories in the Star Wars universe. You just have to, like Tony Gilroy, figure out a way to do it in an interesting fashion. Where was I? Modern Age Nerd says, Star Wars is trying to build a science fiction world as complex as our own upon a foundation that is once upon a time fantasy. Oh, I totally agree with that. But here's the thing. the first Star Wars was not necessarily once upon a time fantasy. The original Star Wars, it had elements of that, but there was a lot of really interesting stuff happening. Like you had the Dust Bowl of Tatooine; they're literally farming moisture out of the sky. You had the Western town. You had the men on a mission. You had the war movie trappings, and then the idea of the rebellion, and then the suicide mission to take out the enemy place. I don't think that making a world, if you're dealing with an empire and a rebellion, it's already there. To focus on why that empire, what was a workaday empire, and how did the rebellion start is, I think those are natural outgrowths to telling a Star Wars story. One of my favorite Japanese animes, actually my favorite of all time, is Legends of the Galactic Heroes. And if you watch it, they do, you never know, where they do side stories to deal with the actual war, and what they go into the lives of civilians, boots on the ground, and what happens to them because of this giant galactic conflict. I don't have a problem with the Star Wars universe. You tell a bunch of different stories. And I think that what Andor does is it gives it gravitas. Like if you watch, I mean, I always thought that Rogue One didn't quite fit with A New Hope, which is stupid for me to call it A New Hope, but it was Star Wars, because the end of that movie doesn't really, I still don't know why the blockade runner is going to, why is it going to Tatooine? It can go anywhere and transmit its data back to Yavin, but it doesn't. It's such a weird, it doesn't, I don't think it entirely works, but I know why they were doing it. But so yeah, I mean, I think you're right, but I think that there's more stories to be told. Star Wars has now become a storytelling medium. It's a genre unto itself, and you can tell many stories underneath its umbrella. Darth Plato says history rhymes. Andor taps into that rhyme. It certainly does. B Thing says, my only problem with Andor season 1 was that I found Cassian himself to be a frustrating character. Does season 2 change that? I think absolutely it does. I think Cassian Andor is much better in season 2. 1001 Johnny says, Rob, I always love your show. Thank you. But I really love this 130th episode. Oh, well, thank you for that. I appreciate that. Sean Umamiya? Is Star Wars just something from the past? Well, it is from a long time ago. No, but I think that it reinvents Star Wars. Well, Star Wars now is, remember, it is 48 years old this year. And that's another thing about Star Wars that I find so strange, is that we really don't have something to replace it. And it's kind of interesting. I mean, if you look at the great science fiction epics or TV shows, The Expanse is based on a series of books. Foundation, books, Dune, books. And it's interesting to me that people are really getting into Denis Villeneuve's Dune. It's going to be interesting to see what he does with Dune Messiah. I didn't particularly like the Bene Gesserit series. I thought it was flawed because you're moving outside of Herbert's works and you're going into Brian Herbert and Kevin J. Anderson, which was a little weird. But I mean, I get it. So a 6-Scale Mafia, who's been a member of my channel, says, this guy right here is one of my good friends. Much respect and happy birthday. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Right back at you, sir. Thomas Logan says, Feige reaches out to you and says, Bobby, pitch me an Iron Man reboot for 2028 and cast it. If hired your DGA salary is $9 million, production budget is $200. But see, you can't pitch me I can't throw out an idea immediately for an Iron Man reboot. I don't even know where the universe is going to go. I mean, look, to me, if you were going to do an Iron Man reboot, I would lean back into the idea of see, but the thing is, it's not about Iron Man, it's about Tony Stark. The reason Iron Man works is because of Tony Stark. And the great thing about Tony Stark is he was Bruce Wayne without the parent issues. He was a rich playboy who was also a super genius, and he was living life to the full. Stark Industries was building weapons. He was out there on the front lines selling things. I think the interesting thing about Tony Stark was he found a purpose in life, and over the course of the Infinity Saga, he learns that he wants to protect the world. His world was a small place. And then, even though the world was his oyster, and then it got bigger and bigger, and then he realized the world itself is in a universe that's much bigger than he even philosophy than ever he dreamt of. And that's what made him interesting, I think. And I think that what you'd have to do is you have to reboot Tony Stark, but what do? You have to give him, I mean, they've already played that card where he realizes that the universe is a much bigger place than even he thought. And so what does that mean, and what's he going to do about it? And the answer to that is an interesting question, and I'd have to think hard about it, but it would probably be a variation on a theme of the whole putting a suit of armor around the world. But yeah. Fearless Wolf says, Andor Season 2 feels like allo in space. Berets, accents, singing. Disney's making it way more Earth-like than George ever did. Lost that galaxy far, far away grit. Well, I mean, I think, again, that's intentional. It's totally, I mean, Gorman is France to the point where they're all artists and they make cool clothes and, couture and all that. But I think that's okay, I mean, if you think about it, the main characters, I mean, we did see Chewbacca and R2, and now we've got K2SO back. And we have been seeing a lot of alien senators. It's just I think that you have Gilroy wanted to focus on the human characters to make it more, like you said, allo in space. I don't have a problem with that. Modern Age Nerd says, thanks for answering my questions. One last, I feel the Star Wars movies used to be a showcase of the latest VFX technology. That was the biggest appeal up to 2005. Well, I mean, I think that I think that's an interesting, especially if you haven't yet, I would encourage everybody to watch the second season of Light and Magic, the ILM documentary that's on Disney Plus. They dropped the second season. It's only 3 episodes, but it's all about the prequel trilogy. It's really, really interesting. But I think effects technology is, where does it go? I mean, there's really nowhere for it to go. Now we're going to have AI that's literally, the effects technology is going to replace cameramen. You're going to have, AI is going to generate 3-dimensional virtual sets. You won't even need cameramen anymore. I mean, you will. I don't want to live in that world, but, already people are making they're working on prompt-generated AI movies. It'll be interesting to see if someone can use AI and make a movie as engaging as a Pixar film, or a live-action movie that's engaging as a quote-unquote live-action movie that's engaging as a live-action film is. I'm really curious to see that. I won't know. I mean, we're really in the native, I mean, the recently born phases of all of this. I don't know where it's going to go in 10 or 20 or 30 years. Combine AI with quantum computing, I have no clue. No clue. But yeah, I mean, Star Wars really, it didn't just showcase VFX technology, it pioneered it. I mean, if you think about it, the Dijkstraflex camera, motion control photography, when they built that camera in the computer and they could duplicate camera moves, and suddenly you could do passes and create the effects that they created for the original Star Wars, and Go Motion, adding motion blur to the Tauntaun stop motion animation that, later was used in the Vermithrax pejorative for Dragon Slayer, and all the technology moving forward. ILM making that the first character, and young Sherlock Holmes, and the T-1000 and the Abyss, the pseudopod, and going all the way up to where they're at now. I mean, it's really amazing where effects technology has gone, but I just don't know where it can go from that now. To me, because there's an over-reliance on effects now, that there's too many set extensions and too many green screen sets, effects technology has actually slid backwards. The only movies that I'm impressed by the effects anymore are Avatar. I think that James Cameron is still out there pushing the envelope. Everything else is just variations on a theme, but Avatar is truly jaw-dropping because you're looking at something that isn't there. None of it's there. And it's unbelievable. The water in I keep saying the way of water. It is the way of water. But amazing, astonishing. And I look forward to Mordor Navi. So, yeah. DUI Champ says, if someone asked you where they should start watching Star Wars, could you in good conscience recommend Revenge of the Sith? I struggle with episode 3. Well, you know what? I'm a big advocate of the machete order of Star Wars. If they didn't have the numbers on them. Now, you know what I would do now? Now I would tell people to start with Andor seasons 1 and 2. But if you wanted to get people into Star Wars, what you have to do is there's a new machete order. I would start with A New Hope. And the machete order, for those of you who don't know, would be you watch A New Hope and Empire Strikes Back, and then you skip Return of the Jedi, right? And then you go back, you go to Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, and then go to Return of the Jedi. But you could even add to that machete order now with Andor. So maybe you could watch the way to do it would be, I mean, theoretically, you could watch Andor seasons 1 and 2, but Andor seasons 1 and 2 would not be the place. If you're an adult, maybe start there. But if you're trying to get kids into Star Wars, you show them Star Wars, you show them Empire, you show them Attack of the Clones, Revenge of the Sith, and Return of the Jedi. And then if they're interested, you can go back and show them Andor and Star Wars if they're old enough. But, yeah. And let me see here. Peter sends in a tip. If you want to send in a tip, they're in the link, the description down below. Do you think that they will ever re-release Star Wars, but with none of the new special effects, completely the exact same from the 70s, just updated to 4K? Well, they are. The BFI is screening a Technicolor print in England of that. I tend to not think so, only because I think that there's a reason, a personal reason for George Lucas. When he made the special editions, they have new copyrights, so he no longer had to pay Marcia as much as he was having to pay her. So I think that's part of it. I wish that they would, because I can't. The special editions, I just can't. I can't watch them. Thank God I have like 3 different versions of the originals from various places, but I really hope that they would. I really do hope that they would. Zephyr Chan, all the way from Hong Kong, says, please, Robert, take the time to schedule me on your show. You know you miss and want me. It's true. I do miss and want you. But you like who you like. I mean, what can I say? 1001 Johnny says, the greatest sci-fi fantasy film ever made, still greater than Star Wars, is 1964's Santa Claus Conquers the Martians. Come on, man. The hell you say? The Martians' arc of recognizing the pure humanity of old Saint Nick's willingness to make the children of Mars smile demonstrates how quickly the Empire would have fallen if they ever dared to try and bring the busiest man on Christmas to the dark side. Actually, that's a great idea. Santa Claus gets tempted by the dark side. You know, I'll tell you, if someone said that I had all the money in the world, you know, if I had bought crypto back in 2009 when someone brought up Bitcoin to me and I was like, what's Bitcoin? I have no idea. And if I'd done it, you know, and bought like 50,000 Bitcoin Bitcoin in 50,000 back in 2009, whatever that would, I don't know how, that would be worth a lot of money now. I could have sold it at 100,000 a coin, and that would have been, what's 100,000 times 50,000? Never mind. I don't even want to know. But if I had that, there's a book by Robert Devereaux. I think it's more than one book now, but the book, I've only read the first one, called Santa Steps Out. And it is a blasphemous R, borderline X-rated story about Santa Claus having an affair with the Tooth Fairy and how it shakes the pillars of creation. We really shook the pillars of heaven, didn't we, Wang? Which I would recommend to everybody. The Crimson Z-Rex says, my sci-fi action black comedy slasher. A Jason Voorhees type, reformed into an anti-heroic samurai master, must join forces with 2 of his past victims' teenage daughter to take on the ultimate sin against Mother Nature, raging zombie velociraptors. It sounds like an Asylum movie. That means you can get it made. And nor would I ever want to dissuade you of trying to do that. So you go right ahead. Do it. Make it happen. But look, do you, I champ? You ask if I struggle with episode 3. I struggle with the whole prequel trilogy because George Lucas was too detached from humanity by the time he made those. The problem with those movies is, I think, first of all, a Star Wars movie needs a human being that they can relate to, and none of the people in the sequel trilogy, or pardon me, in the prequel trilogy, none of them feel human. They feel like constructs because their performances are cut and pasted together. Sometimes George took a head off one performance and stuck it on the body of another. I mean, it's completely unnatural. Everything feels stilted. Nothing feels real, which is problematic. I mean, you even made Samuel Jackson stilted, which is a difficult thing to do. B Thing says, with all of this pessimism about society's insolent ignorance, is there any hope for people to fall in love with storytelling all over again? Oh, they will once they fall out of love with themselves. I mean, we all know that, look, we're living... Here's the thing. Wim Wenders made a really interesting movie called Until the End of the World. And it was set in like 1999, but it came out, 1990? And if you haven't seen Until the End of the World, I love the movie. Now there's like a 5-hour version you can get. But in the movie, they make a machine where you can play back your own dreams. And everybody's just addicted. The people that have the machine, they get addicted. It doesn't sweep through the world yet. It's a plot point. But once you can see your own dreams, you're so enamored of your own subconscious that people just are watching their own subconscious. And it becomes way more because they're trying to figure themselves out, and what does this all mean? And right now we're kind of in that phase. We are the protagonists of our own stories, and look what I'm doing. I mean, I've done 1,030. This is my 1,030th. That's just Robservations. For 10 years, I've done thousands of YouTube shows. And I like doing it. And to be honest, it augments my income, which is good. But at the end of the day, I would much rather have spent all of this time creating something new and unique that you could all enjoy, like True Noir. I've done that, but not to the extent I would have wanted to because it's really difficult out there. And as I get older, it's even more difficult. So, the fact that I got True Noir made, which, by the way, is available, truenoir.co. It'll eventually be on bigger platforms. But I'm really proud of True Noir. If you would ask me, and part of the reason that I'm able to talk smack about anything on the internet is because I've been making things the whole time I've been on the internet. When I started, I was working on this low-budget, feature called Paradox that my friend Mike Hurst was directing that starred Quentin Tarantino's Zoe Bell. And it was a $250,000 movie set in a couple of rooms, a hallway, and a parking lot. And it's a big time travel story. And we had no money. I mean, but I'm really proud of that movie. The special effects literally cost $27 a shot. That's a true story. They all cost $27 a shot. But the story kind of holds together. The people are interesting. It's got an interesting time travel story it all takes place in basically 1 hour. And when I started my YouTube career going to Collider, at first AMC, then Collider, being on Collider Heroes, the only reason I felt I could opine about anything is because I was also making something at the same time. And if I wasn't, I don't, for me personally, I couldn't ever just be a fan. And then I've had people in the industry going, how can you be online and be a critic and be critical of things when you're actually making things and interacting with other people in the industry? And I'm like, why shouldn't we be critical of things? We're making stuff. We should be our own worst critics. And the thing is, if I love something, I'll tell you I love it. It's very funny. It goes in waves. Sometimes I hate everything, and people yell and scream, oh, Burnett hates everything. Or lately, I'm a shill and I love everything. Or I'm on the campiest show, so I'm a shill. It's such a weird, like, I've never pulled my punches on anything I've liked or didn't like, but I'm predisposed to liking stuff. I mean, look, the fact that we're getting a Long Walk movie, I can't believe it. After 45 years, after I read that book, I've wanted to see The Long Walk literally for 45 years. Frank Darabont had the rights to that movie for a long, long time, or the rights to the book, and now we're getting it from Francis Lawrence, which it's going to look great. It looks great. I honestly, I cannot, I can't wait to see it. The trailer looks like the book. You know, everyone's like, oh, it's like Hunger Games. No, this book came out in 1979. 79. I mean, the things that maybe were similar, you could say Rollerball was kind of similar, but the biggest one was The 10th Victim. If you guys haven't seen The 10th Victim, Elio Petri's The 10th Victim with Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress, it just came out on Blu-ray from Kino Lorber again. Blue Underground had put it out before. The 10th Victim is great. That's a movie that's so thirsty for Ursula Andress, but The 10th Victim is set in the future. I mean, it's not the future now. You'll think it looks Austin Powers-esque, but it's set in Europe, and they have a thing called the Big Hunt, and you have to be a hunter and you have to be prey 10 times. And Marcello Mastroianni and Ursula Andress are kind of going after each other. And you'll even see where in that movie, Ursula Andress has the brassiere that has the guns in it, which you'll recognize from Austin Powers, but The 10th Victim did it first. And it's got a great score, so check that out if you want to. Because man, it's a lot of fun. I mean, you look, it's hard to go back and look at these things, because you have to put yourself in the mindset of when they came out. A lot of people are like, this is so goofy, I can't watch it, which I understand. BCH says the best part of the prequels, Padme blowing Anakin's mind with that leather dress. It's true. But you can see that one of the things that's wrong with those movies is the romance is the way it's portrayed is, I mean, I know he thinks he's making it because George Lucas is thinking about it like he's a little kid. And that's the problem. What you needed was all of his degenerate 70s filmmakers around him when he made those movies, and you would have had something great. But he was, I'm just making it. These are kids movies. I'm making kids movies. So even the tempestuous romance, which should have had an erotic charge to it, but he's like, no, I can't do that. I'm making kids movies, which is kind of a bummer if you think about it. Well, listen, everybody, it's a call to arms for fandom. Forget ChatGPT. Please start using Google. Start reading some books. Just get out there and like Quado said in Total Recall, open your mind. Go out and explore, man. Go find shit you haven't experienced before. Do some cross-referencing. Get onto Google. Find out what books or what movies did Tony Gilroy find inspiration to make Andor from. Go see a movie you've never heard of before. Find something you've never read before. Look up, read A Fire Upon the Deep by Werner Vinge. Get back to me on that one. A Fire Upon the Deep. Don't get scared about how big that book is. Just go pick up something you just don't know anything about, and experience it, and go read it. And there's a lot of great stuff out there that you won't have to bitch and moan about. You'll watch this and go, man, this kicked ass. And you'll really like it if you give it a chance. And the more you explore, the more you know, the more you'll appreciate all the things that you already love. That's like this article said. That article about reading and the connections that you make. Like I've said, watching a movie is a skill, and you should be able to get better at it. And the people that don't think of it as a skill, maybe, I mean, and again, that's just because me, first and foremost, I am a movie fan, first and foremost. That is my first love, is movies. But part of the reason I love movies so much is that books made me love them. And that's why I wanted to point out all those science fiction movies I watched as a kid, that a lot of them I went back and read the actual original source material. And it made me a better person. And on that note, I can't wait. I mean, I'm sad that next week Andor is going to be done. But there's a lot of great stuff. I mean, there's a lot of great stuff. I'm actually excited to see Final Destination Bloodlines. I can't wait to see Mission Impossible. There's a lot of great stuff. We got Weapons coming out. Really looking forward to Weapons. Together, the Dave Franco and Alison Brie movie, husband and wife film where they actually meld together, I guess. That trailer looks great. There's so much good stuff. The boys who made Talk to Me have their new movie coming out. A lot of cool stuff coming down the pike, and I'm excited. I'm excited about it. I don't know if I'm going to have any money after all the tariffs and everything, all the crazy things that are happening. If Pakistan and India, if they get into a hot nuke war, that's not going to be good either for anybody. So hopefully everyone needs to just calm the fuck down. Just take a chill pill. I wish we could, but too much craziness happening. But on that note, I want to thank everybody for tuning in. I want to thank you for generously supporting this channel via super chats and tips. And if you want to send me a letter, rmburnett1701 at gmail.com and put in the subject heading Robservations letter. And send me letters. I'll read them if they're good. Don't use fucking ChatGPT either. I want to thanks to my moderators. I don't know if anybody was here. Darth Plato was here. People said there was spamming in the chat. I apologize for that. We usually have a pretty good chat here. I'm sorry for that. I did not mean for that to happen. So I apologize. And then remember, every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And with that, if you have any comments, leave them down there. And remember, have a better night. I'll see you tomorrow on the Campia Show.